My wife said she was going to a girls' night. I found her at the club with a stranger's hands on her waist. I didn't make a scene. I just took a photo and sent it to her mother. She came home to her bags on the porch and her family waiting for an explanation. That's the short version. The truth is messier, like most truths worth telling. My name is Thomas Waverly, and I've spent the last 15 years thinking I knew my wife. Turns out, I knew about as much as a mechanic knows about quantum physics, which is to say, nothing useful when it matters. I run a small auto restoration shop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Nothing fancy, just me, 2 part-time guys, and enough vintage muscle cars to keep the lights on. Jessica always called it Tom's little hobby, like I was collecting stamps instead of running a business that paid half our mortgage. She worked real estate, selling overpriced coastal properties to wealthy retirees from Boston. Made good money at it too, I'll give her that. Better than mine, most months. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks ago. Jessica announced she was joining a female bonding group that met Thursday nights. Said it was professional women supporting each other, networking, that sort of thing. Made sense, I suppose. Jessica always was ambitious, always looking for the next angle to climb higher on the social ladder. But here's the thing about being married to someone for 15 years. You develop instincts. And my instincts were screaming that something smelled rotten. It started small. New perfume. Clothes I'd never seen before. Expensive stuff that didn't match her usual style. She'd always been careful with money. Practical. Suddenly she's walking around in designer heels that cost more than I make in a week. When I asked about it, she got defensive. Can't a woman buy herself something nice without getting interrogated? She snapped, adjusting the strap on a purse that probably cost more than my tool set. Fair enough, I thought. Maybe she was just treating herself. Lord knows she worked hard enough for it. Then came the phone calls, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, text messages that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd wave me off. Just the girls from the group. You wouldn't understand the dynamics. The dynamics. Right. The final straw was last Thursday. Jessica left for her meeting, wearing a black dress that hugged every curve she had. Full makeup, hair done like she was going to a wedding. I'd seen her dress up for client dinners before, but this was different. This was hunting attire. Thought you were just meeting with the girls, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. We're going somewhere nice tonight. Networking event. She kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark I could feel for an hour after she left. Something in my gut twisted. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but I'd learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had saved me from bad business deals, warned me about customers who wouldn't pay their bills. Now it was telling me my wife was lying to my face. I waited an hour after she left, then got in my truck and drove to the Velvet Note, the upscale jazz club downtown where she'd mentioned the group sometimes went. Parking across the street, I had a clear view of the entrance. If this really was innocent female bonding, I'd see her with a group of women and feel like an idiot for doubting her. But if it wasn't... 20 minutes later, Jessica's silver BMW pulled up to the valet stand. She stepped out alone, smoothed down her dress, and walked into the club like she owned the place. No group of professional women. No networking event. Just my wife, dressed to impress, walking into a jazz club by herself. I sat there for another 10 minutes, debating whether to follow her inside or just drive home. Maybe she was meeting the group there. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe 15 years of marriage had made me suspicious of shadows. Then I saw him. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He walked up to the club entrance with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. The kind of guy who drove expensive cars and vacationed in places I couldn't pronounce. Everything about him screamed money and charm and all the things I wasn't. I didn't need to follow him inside to know where he was going. The sick feeling in my stomach told me everything I needed to know. But I followed anyway. Because sometimes you need proof, even when the truth is staring you in the face. The velvet note was dimly lit, all exposed brick and polished wood, with a small stage where a trio played soft jazz for the dinner crowd. I found a spot at the bar where I could see most of the dining area without being obvious about it. It took me 5 minutes to spot them. Corner booth, intimate lighting, her hand resting on the table where he could reach it easily. They weren't quite touching, but the body language was unmistakable. This wasn't a chance meeting. This wasn't networking. This was a date. I watched my wife laugh at something he said, watched her lean forward in a way that gave him a perfect view down her dress, watched her reach across the table to touch his arm, let her fingers linger there just a moment too long. 15 years of marriage, and I was watching my wife flirt with another man like I'd never existed. The smart thing would have been to confront them. March over to their table, demand an explanation, make a scene that would at least give me the satisfaction of ruining their evening. But I've never been accused of being the smartest guy in the room. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a photo. One picture, clear shot of both their faces, his hand on her waist as they stood to move to the dance floor. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Just my wife in another man's arms, looking happier than she'd looked with me in years. I left without saying a word, drove home through the quiet streets of Portsmouth, past the harbor where fishing boats bobbed in the moonlight, past the old colonial houses where normal families were probably settling in for the evening. Normal families where husbands and wives didn't lie to each other about Thursday night plans. Back home, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the photo on my phone. Jessica's face was radiant, caught mid-laugh at something her companion had whispered in her ear. She looked beautiful. She looked alive. She looked like a stranger. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I didn't text Jessica, didn't call her to demand explanations or threaten divorce. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Eleanor Bishop, Jessica's mother. Eleanor had never liked me, thought Jessica was settling when she married a mechanic instead of a lawyer or doctor. 15 years of polite tolerance at family gatherings, of subtle digs about my profession and our modest lifestyle. She'd been waiting for this moment, probably hoping for it. I attached the photo and typed a simple message. Thought you should know where your daughter spends her Thursday nights. Then I pressed send. The response came back in less than 2 minutes. Harold and I will be right over. While I waited for Jessica's parents to arrive, I went upstairs and packed her belongings. Not everything, just enough to make the point clear. Clothes, toiletries, the jewelry I'd bought her over the years, each item felt like evidence of a life that had been built on lies. I carried the suitcases downstairs and set them on the front porch, lined up neatly beside the door. Then I sat on the porch swing and waited. Eleanor and Harold Bishop arrived 30 minutes later, their black Cadillac pulling into the driveway with the quiet authority of old money. Eleanor emerged first, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, her face set in the expression of righteous indignation I'd seen at every family gathering for 15 years. Harold followed more slowly, a tall, imposing man who'd built a successful law practice on the principle that silence was often more effective than words. Thomas, Eleanor said, her voice crisp as winter air. I assume you have an explanation for that photograph. I assume Jessica does, I replied. She should be home soon, unless she's decided to make a night of it. Eleanor's mouth tightened. Harold said nothing, but his presence filled the porch like a storm cloud. We sat in uncomfortable silence, 3 people waiting for the 4th to come home and explain why she'd blown up her marriage for a stranger in an expensive suit. Jessica's BMW turned into the driveway at 11:15. I watched her face through the windshield as she processed the scene, her parents' car, her suitcases on the porch, me sitting there like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. She sat in her car for a full minute before getting out. When she finally did, she moved slowly, like someone walking to their own execution. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. Eleanor held up her phone, the photo clearly visible on the screen. "Would you like to explain this?" Jessica's face went pale. She looked at the photo, then at her suitcases, then at me. "Tom, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I said. "Your parents drove all the way over here to listen. So did I. We're all ears." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For someone who made a living convincing people to buy overpriced real estate, she seemed remarkably short on persuasive arguments. "It's not what it looks like," she finally managed. Harold spoke for the first time since arriving. "What does it look like, Jessica?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jessica looked at each of us in turn, searching for sympathy, for understanding, for any crack in our united front. She found none. "I needed to feel desirable again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom, you stopped seeing me. We became roommates, not lovers. I just wanted to feel alive again." "So you decided to feel alive with someone else," I said. "How's that working out for you?" Eleanor stood up, her purse clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "Jessica Marie Bishop, you were raised better than this. Your father and I taught you about commitment, about honor, about keeping your word." "It's Jessica Marie Waverly now," I said quietly. Or it was, anyway. Harold placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. "We're leaving, Eleanor. Our daughter has made her choices." They walked to their car without another word. Eleanor didn't look back. Harold paused at the driver's door, met my eyes across the driveway, and nodded once. It was the first time in 15 years he'd shown me anything resembling respect. Jessica watched her parents drive away, then turned back to me. "Tom, please. We can work through this. It was a mistake. I love you." "No," I said, standing up from the porch swing. "You love the idea of me. The security, the stability, the house with the white picket fence. But you don't love me enough to keep your hands off other men." "It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything." I picked up her suitcases and set them on the walkway. "Your Thursday night friend can help you figure out where to go from here." She stood there for a long moment, looking lost and small in her expensive dress. Then she loaded her bags into her car and drove away into the night. I went inside, poured myself a drink, and sat in the silence of my empty house. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Jessica didn't come home that night or the next morning. Good. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out exactly how I was going to handle this situation. Because one thing had become crystal clear as I sat in my empty house. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Friday morning, I opened my shop as usual. My two part-time employees, Danny and Rick, could tell something was wrong, but they were smart enough not to ask questions. We had a 1967 Mustang that needed a new transmission, and work was exactly what I needed to keep my hands busy while my mind processed what came next. Around noon, my phone started buzzing. Text messages from Jessica, each one more desperate than the last. "Tom, please call me. We need to talk. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown, room 412. Please come see me. I made a terrible mistake. Don't throw away 15 years over one stupid decision." I deleted each message without responding. Let her sweat a little. Let her wonder what I was thinking, what I was planning. In my experience, uncertainty was more effective than anger. The real surprise came at 2 o'clock, when a silver Porsche pulled up outside my shop. The same man from the club stepped out, looking like he'd walked off the cover of a men's magazine. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of confident smile that probably opened a lot of doors and dropped a lot of panties. He walked into my shop like he owned it, glancing around at the tools and car parts with the expression of someone visiting a zoo. "You must be Tom," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Marco DeLuca, I think we need to talk. I wiped my greasy hands on a shop rag and ignored his outstretched hand. Do we? Marco lowered his hand, but kept smiling. Look, I know this situation is complicated. But Jessica and I, we care about each other. We didn't plan for this to happen. What exactly didn't you plan? Meeting my wife? Taking her to dinner? Putting your hands all over her while she was still wearing my ring? His smile faltered slightly. It's not like that. Jessica told me her marriage was over. She said you two were just going through the motions. And you believed her? She seemed sincere. I set down my wrench and gave Marco my full attention. Up close, he was exactly what I'd expected. Handsome in that polished, artificial way that came from expensive grooming and regular gym sessions. The kind of man whose hands were always clean, whose nails were trimmed perfectly, whose calluses, if he had any at all, came from gripping a steering wheel, not tools. Probably never worked with his hands in his life, never had to worry about making payroll or fixing something that was actually broken, never felt the quiet panic of realizing a machine and a livelihood depended entirely on him getting it right. Let me guess, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. You're in sales. Real estate, maybe? Insurance? Something where looking good and talking smooth is more important than actual skill. I could see him bristle slightly, unused to being sized up instead of admired. Marco's jaw tightened. I'm in import-export. I have my own business. He said it like it should impress me, like it was supposed to explain everything. Import-export. I nodded like that meant something, like I hadn't heard that vague title 100 times before. Fancy way of saying you buy stuff cheap and sell it expensive. How's that working out for you? I turned slightly so he could see the car behind me, half disassembled, real work waiting to be finished. Look, Tom, he started, already sounding defensive. Mr. Waverly, I corrected, not raising my voice. We're not friends, Marco. We're not going to grab a beer and work this out like gentlemen. You screwed my wife, and now you're standing in my shop acting like you're doing me a favor by explaining it. The words were flat, factual, stripped of emotion. That seemed to bother him more than yelling would have. Marco's polished facade was starting to crack now, little fractures forming around the edges of his confidence. Jessica's a grown woman. She made her own choices. He lifted his hands slightly, like that absolved him of responsibility. She did. And now she gets to live with them. I picked up my wrench again, deliberately turning back to the Mustang's engine, signaling that in my mind, this conversation was already over. You too. What's that supposed to mean? His voice sharpened, uncertainty creeping in. I looked at him over my shoulder. Means you might want to be more careful about the married women you chase. Some husbands don't take it as well as others. I didn't threaten him. I didn't have to. I just let the implication hang there. Marco stood there for another moment, trying to figure out if that was a threat. It wasn't, exactly. More like a weather forecast. Information you ignore at your own risk. After he left, the shop felt quieter, steadier. I called my friend Cassie, who owned a bar called Murphy's about 10 minutes from my shop. Cassie and I had known each other since high school, and she'd never liked Jessica. Said she was too ambitious, too willing to step on people to get what she wanted. Turned out, Cassie was a better judge of character than I was. Heard through the grapevine that Jessica's been making some interesting social choices, Cassie said when I walked into her bar that evening. The place smelled like hops and old wood, familiar and comforting. You want to talk about it, or just drink until it stops hurting? Neither, I said, settling onto a bar stool. I want to talk about making it hurt worse. Saying it out loud felt strange, but also clarifying. Cassie raised an eyebrow. She was a small woman with short red hair and arms covered in tattoos, tough as leather and twice as smart as most people gave her credit for. That doesn't sound like you, Tom. Maybe it's time I tried being someone else for a while. someone who didn't just absorb damage and keep going. She poured me a beer and leaned against the bar. What did you have in mind? There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. I told her about the photo, about Jessica's parents, about Marco's visit to my shop. I filled in the details I hadn't shared with anyone yet. Cassie listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of disgust, her expression darkening as the picture became clearer. "So what's your play?" she asked when I finished, setting my empty bottle aside. Jessica's always been worried about her reputation. What people think of her, how she looks to her clients, her family, her friends. She's built her whole identity around being respectable. The word tasted bitter now. And I think it's time people knew who she really is. I said it calmly, like a conclusion I'd reached after careful consideration. Cassie grinned. "Now you're talking my language. What do you need?" There was a spark in her eyes, the look of someone who enjoyed leveling a playing field. What I needed was information. Jessica's girls' night story had been a lie, but she'd been somewhere every Thursday for the past month. Patterns always left traces. If she and Marco had been meeting regularly, there would be a trail. Credit card receipts, social media posts, maybe even other photos taken by people who didn't know or care who they were capturing. Cassie knew people. Bartenders, waitresses, hotel clerks. The invisible army of service workers who saw everything and remembered more than most people realized. By the end of the evening, she'd made half a dozen phone calls and promised to have some answers by morning. I drove home through the quiet streets of Portsmouth, past the club where I'd discovered my wife's betrayal, past the hotel where she was probably spending the night with her new boyfriend. Every familiar landmark felt different now, stripped of nostalgia and seen clearly for the first time. The house felt different too, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Saturday morning brought the first real breakthrough. Cassie called at 8 o'clock with news. "Your wife and her boyfriend have been regulars at the Velvet Note for 3 weeks, she said. "Always Thursday nights, always the same corner booth. My friend Sarah tends bar there. Says they're all over each other, acting like teenagers." "Anything else?" "Oh, it gets better. They've been to dinner at Ristorante Massimo twice, drinks at the Harbor Lights Hotel bar, and last weekend they spent Saturday afternoon at the Sheraton downtown. Room 1247 if you're interested." I was very interested. "How did you—" "Sarah's cousin works the front desk at the Sheraton. She remembers them because the guy paid cash and your wife signed the register as Mrs. DeLuca. Classy, right?" Mrs. DeLuca. My wife of 15 years had been playing house with another man, trying on his name like a new dress. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected, but the anger that followed was clean and focused. "There's more," Cassie continued. "Turns out your boyfriend Marco isn't quite the successful businessman he pretends to be. His import-export company is basically him and a warehouse full of cheap furniture he buys online and resells to hotels. He's behind on rent, behind on his car payments, and his business license expires next month." "How do you know all this?" "I know a guy who knows a guy. Marco's been trying to get a loan from some questionable sources. Word is, he's desperate for cash." "Interesting. So Marco wasn't just stealing my wife. He was broke while doing it." That opened up some possibilities. I spent the weekend gathering intelligence. Drove past Jessica's hotel, confirmed that Marco's Porsche was in the parking lot both nights. Checked her social media accounts, where she was still posting pictures of herself looking happy and successful, with no mention of her changed relationship status. Visited some of the restaurants and bars where she'd been seen with Marco, talking to servers who remembered the happy couple. By Monday morning, I had a complete picture of my wife's double life. 3 weeks of lies, 3 weeks of expensive dinners and hotel rooms, 3 weeks of her playing the role of Marco's girlfriend while still legally married to me. Time to return the favor. I started with Jessica's workplace. Coastal Properties was an upscale real estate agency that catered to wealthy buyers looking for vacation homes and retirement properties. Image was everything in that business. Reputation meant the difference between million-dollar commissions and unemployment. Jessica's boss was a woman named Patricia Henley, a sharp-dressed professional who'd built the agency from nothing over the past decade. I'd met her at a few company parties over the years. Polite, but distant, the kind of person who judged you by your profession and your bank account. I called Patricia's office Monday morning and asked to speak with her privately. "Mr. Waverly?" Patricia sounded surprised. "Is everything all right? Jessica hasn't been in since Friday. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Could we meet for coffee? There's something you should know about Jessica's recent activities." We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the real estate office and the places where Jessica might see us. Patricia arrived looking concerned and professional, probably expecting me to tell her that Jessica was sick or dealing with a family emergency. Instead, I showed her the photo from the Velvet Note. Patricia stared at the image for a long moment, her face carefully neutral. "I see. And this man is Marco De Luca. They've been meeting regularly for the past month. Hotels, restaurants, playing house while she's still married to me. I'm sorry, Tom. This must be very difficult for you, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." I leaned forward slightly. "Because Jessica has been lying to you too. All those Thursday night client meetings she's been attending, the networking events, the professional development seminars, she's been having an affair." Patricia's expression hardened. Coastal Properties had a strict code of conduct for its agents. Personal scandals reflected poorly on the agency, especially in a small community where reputation was everything. "You're certain about this?" she asked. "I have receipts, hotel records, witness statements from restaurant staff. Jessica's been using company time and company resources to conduct a personal relationship." That wasn't entirely true, but Patricia didn't need to know the details. What mattered was planting the seed of doubt, making her question Jessica's honesty and professionalism. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," Patricia said carefully. "I'll need to discuss this with Jessica when she returns to work. Of course, I just thought you should know what kind of person you're employing." I left Patricia at the cafe and drove to my next stop, Jessica's parents' house. Eleanor Bishop answered the door looking like she'd aged 5 years since Thursday night. Her usual perfect composure was cracked around the edges, and she seemed smaller somehow, diminished by her daughter's betrayal. "Thomas," she said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to thank you for your support the other night, and to give you this." I handed her a manila envelope containing copies of everything I'd discovered about Jessica's affair. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, witness statements from Cassie's network of contacts. Eleanor opened the envelope and glanced through the contents, her face growing paler with each page. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "At least a month. Probably longer." I kept my voice gentle, sympathetic. Eleanor might have looked down on me for 15 years, but she was still a mother dealing with her daughter's betrayal. "I thought you should know the full extent of what Jessica's been doing." "Harold will be devastated," she whispered. "We raised her better than this." "You did. This isn't your fault, Mrs. Bishop. This is Jessica's choice." Eleanor closed the envelope and looked at me with something approaching respect. "What will you do now?" "Whatever I have to do to protect myself. Jessica made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences." I left Eleanor standing in her doorway, clutching the evidence of her daughter's betrayal. By evening, Harold would know everything. By tomorrow, Jessica's entire family would understand exactly what kind of person she'd become. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The real fun was just beginning. Tuesday morning brought the first sign that my plan was working. Jessica called at 7 a.m., her voice tight with panic. "Tom, what did you do? Patricia wants to see me in her office first thing this morning." She sounded furious. "Good morning to you too, Jessica. How was your weekend at the hotel?" Silence on the other end. Then, You've been watching me. I've been protecting my interests. Turns out you and Marco have been quite the social butterflies. Amazing what people notice when they're paying attention. Tom, please, don't do this. Don't destroy my career over a personal matter. Personal matter? I almost laughed. You mean your affair? The one you've been conducting on company time, lying to your boss about where you've been spending your evenings? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You made your choice, Jessica. You chose Marco over our marriage. Now you get to live with all the consequences, not just the fun parts. She hung up on me. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk, Marco. I ignored it. Let him sweat too. Around 10 o'clock, Cassie called with an update. Your wife just left Coastal Properties looking like someone ran over her dog. Word is she's been suspended pending an investigation into her conduct. That was fast. Patricia Henley doesn't mess around when it comes to the agency's reputation. Apparently Jessica tried to deny everything, but Patricia had documentation. Your wife's been officially placed on administrative leave. Perfect. Jessica's career was built on relationships, on trust, on the image of success and stability she projected to her clients. A suspension would be like a scarlet letter in the tight-knit world of high-end real estate. But I wasn't done with her professional life yet. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the Portsmouth Chamber of Commerce. Jessica served on their networking committee, a volunteer position that helped her make contacts and build her client base. The committee was run by a woman named Margaret Walsh, a local business owner who took the chamber's reputation very seriously. Tom Waverly, Margaret said when I walked into her office. I haven't seen you in ages. How's the restoration business? Doing well, thanks. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about Jessica's position on the networking committee. Margaret's expression grew cautious. Is there a problem? I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo from the Velvet Note. I'm afraid there is. Jessica's been having an affair, and she's been using her chamber activities as cover for her meetings with her boyfriend. Margaret stared at the photo, her face flushing with anger. The chamber prided itself on supporting ethical business practices and family values. Having a committee member who was publicly cheating on her spouse would be a public relations nightmare. This is very concerning, Margaret said slowly. The chamber can't be associated with this kind of behavior. I understand. I just thought you should know before it becomes public knowledge. Public knowledge? Well, these things have a way of getting out. Jessica's employer already knows. Her family knows. It's only a matter of time before the rest of the community finds out. Margaret nodded grimly. I'll need to discuss this with the board. Jessica's position on the committee may need to be reevaluated. By the end of the day, Jessica had lost her job and her volunteer position. But I was just getting started. Wednesday brought a new development. Marco showed up at my shop again, this time looking less polished and more desperate. Tom, we need to talk, he said, walking through the bay doors like he owned the place. No, we don't. I didn't look up from the engine I was working on. We need you to stay away from my wife and my business. Your wife? You threw her out. You destroyed her career. What kind of man does that to someone he supposedly loves? Now I looked at him. The kind who doesn't like being lied to. The kind who doesn't appreciate his wife playing house with another man while she's still wearing his ring. Marco stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. You're destroying her life out of spite. No, I'm revealing who she really is. There's a difference. I straightened up, wiped my hands on my shop rag. Jessica made her choices. She chose to lie to me, to lie to her employer, to lie to everyone who trusted her. I'm just making sure people know the truth. The truth? The truth is that Jessica was miserable with you. You ignored her, took her for granted, treated her like a piece of furniture. And your solution was to take her to bed while she was still married? Marco's face reddened. We didn't plan for this to happen, but when two people connect, When they find something real. Real, I laughed. You mean the real broke businessman who's behind on his rent? The real import-export company that's basically a guy with a warehouse full of cheap furniture? That kind of real? Marco's confidence evaporated. How did you? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Turns out you're not quite the successful entrepreneur you pretend to be. Does Jessica know you're desperate for money? Does she know your business is failing? My business is fine. Your business is a joke. You're 3 months behind on rent, your suppliers are demanding cash up front, and your business license expires in 2 weeks. You're not Jessica's knight in shining armor. You're just another loser looking for someone to bail you out. Marco's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. Instead, he turned and walked out, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor. That evening, Jessica called again. This time she was crying. Tom, please, you've made your point. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I hurt you, sorry I lied. Sorry I made such a mess of everything, but please, stop. You're destroying my entire life. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm just making sure people know who you really are. If that destroys your life, maybe you should have thought about that before you started lying to everyone. I love you, Tom. I made a mistake, but I love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of me, the security, the stability, the safety net. But you don't love me enough to be faithful. You don't love me enough to be honest. It was just a stupid affair. People make mistakes. People make mistakes, I agreed. But you made choices. You chose to lie to me every Thursday night for a month. You chose to take another man to bed while you were still wearing my ring. You chose to play house with him while telling me you loved me. Those weren't mistakes, Jessica. Those were decisions. She sobbed into the phone. What do you want from me? What will it take for you to stop this? I want you to disappear. I want you to take your boyfriend and your lies and your fake tears and get out of my life. I want to never see you again. Tom. I hung up. Thursday morning brought the most satisfying development yet. Cassie called with news that made my entire week. Remember how I said Marco was desperate for money? She said. Well, it gets better. Turns out he owes some serious cash to some serious people. The kind of people who don't accept excuses. How serious? Serious enough that he's been trying to borrow money from anyone who'll listen, including Jessica. That stopped me cold. Jessica's been giving him money? Not just giving. She cleaned out her savings account yesterday. $15,000, withdrawn in cash. My friend at the bank says she looked like she was about to throw up when she signed the withdrawal slip. $15,000. Jessica's entire emergency fund, the money she'd been saving for years, gone in one day to bail out her broke boyfriend. The betrayal was complete. She hadn't just cheated on me emotionally and physically, she'd been financing it with our money. There's more, Cassie continued. Marco's been telling people around town that he and Jessica are getting married as soon as her divorce is final. Says she's going to help him expand his business, be his partner in more ways than one. Is that right? Oh, it gets even better. He's been bragging about how he stole her from the grease monkey and how she's trading up to a real man, real classy guy, your wife's boyfriend. The grease monkey. I'd been called worse things, but something about that particular insult hit differently. Maybe because it came from a man who was living off my wife's money while talking trash about the husband who'd earned it. Cassie, I said slowly, how would you like to help me throw a party? What kind of party? The kind where everyone gets to meet the real Marco DeLuca and the real Jessica Waverly. That afternoon, I drove to the Portsmouth Community Center, where Jessica's networking group held their monthly mixer. The same group she'd been using as cover for her affair, the same professional women who thought they knew her. The mixer was already in progress when I arrived, 30 or 40 well-dressed women standing around with wine glasses and business cards, making connections and building relationships. I spotted several faces I recognized, Women who'd been to our house for dinner parties, who'd sent Christmas cards for years, who thought of Jessica as a friend. I walked up to the registration table, where a young woman with a clipboard was checking people in. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm looking for the organizer of this event. I have some information about one of your members that I think you should know about." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office with Linda Morrison, the group's president, showing her the photo from the Velvet Note and explaining Jessica's month-long deception. "Jessica told us her husband was supportive of her networking activities," Linda said, staring at the photo with obvious shock. "She said you encouraged her to build professional relationships." "I did encourage her to build professional relationships. I didn't encourage her to have an affair and use your group as her alibi." Linda's face hardened. "This is very serious, Mr. Waverly. Our group is built on trust and mutual support. If Jessica has been lying to us, using us to cover for inappropriate behavior, she has been, for at least a month. Every Thursday night she told me she was here with you. Every Thursday night she was actually with him." Linda stood up, her jaw set with determination. "I think the other members need to know about this. Would you be willing to address the group?" I pretended to consider it. "I don't want to make a scene, but if you think it's important for them to know the truth about Jessica, I do. Very much so." 10 minutes later, I was standing in front of 35 professional women, holding my phone up so they could all see the photo of Jessica and Marco at the Velvet Note. "Ladies," Linda said, her voice carrying across the room, "we have a situation that affects the integrity of our group. Mr. Waverly has brought to our attention that Jessica has been using our meetings as cover for an extramarital affair." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps, angry murmurs, shocked expressions. Several women pulled out their phones, probably to share the news with friends who weren't present. "For the past month," I said, keeping my voice calm and factual, "Jessica has been telling me she was here with all of you, building professional relationships and supporting other women in business. In reality, she was having an affair with this man, Marco DeLuca, lying to her husband, her employer, and all of you in the process." "This is outrageous," said a woman I recognized from Jessica's real estate office. "Jessica presented herself as a role model, someone we could trust and respect." "She's made fools of all of us," added another, "using our group to cover for her cheating." Linda raised her hand for silence. "Jessica's membership in this group is hereby suspended pending a full investigation. We cannot and will not tolerate this kind of deception." I thanked the group for their time and left them to discuss Jessica's betrayal among themselves. By tomorrow morning, every professional woman in Portsmouth would know exactly what Jessica had been doing during her Thursday night meetings. But I still wasn't finished. That evening, I paid a visit to the Velvet Note, the same jazz club where I'd discovered my wife's affair, where she and Marco had been playing their little romantic game for weeks. The manager was a thin man named Curtis, who remembered me from my previous visit. When I explained who I was and why I was there, his expression grew uncomfortable. "Look, Mr. Waverly, I'm sorry about your situation, but we can't get involved in our customers' personal lives." "I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking you to ban them from your establishment." Curtis shook his head. "We can't do that. They haven't broken any laws." "Haven't they?" I pulled out a folder containing copies of Marco's financial records, his overdue bills, his desperate attempts to borrow money from questionable sources. "Your customer Marco DeLuca has been using your club to conduct what amounts to a con game. He's been romancing my wife, convincing her to give him money, all while pretending to be a successful businessman." Curtis flipped through the documents, his frown deepening. "This says he owes money to some pretty dangerous people." "It does. The kind of people who might come looking for him. The kind of people who might not be too careful about where they find him. You really want those people showing up at your club?" Curtis closed the folder and handed it back to me. "I'll speak to security. Mr. DeLuca and his guest will no longer be welcome here." Perfect. One more safe space eliminated, One more place where Jessica and Marco could no longer play their romantic games. By Thursday evening, Jessica's world was collapsing around her. No job, no volunteer position, no professional network, no safe places to meet her boyfriend. Her savings account was empty, her reputation was destroyed, and her family had disowned her. But I wasn't finished yet. The real fireworks were still to come. Friday morning brought the call I'd been waiting for. Jessica, her voice hoarse from crying, begging for mercy. I could hear how exhausted she was, how the last few days had stripped her of the confidence she'd always worn like armor. Whatever strength she'd been relying on had finally collapsed under the weight of public exposure and private guilt. "Tom, please. I'll do anything. I'll leave Marco. I'll go to counseling. I'll sign a post-nuptial agreement. Just please stop destroying my life." Her words tumbled over each other, desperate, rehearsed, as if she'd been practicing them for hours, hoping to find the combination that would make me soften. "Your life was already destroyed," I said, sitting in my office at the shop, watching Danny work on a transmission through the window. The steady clank of tools and the familiar smell of oil grounded me. "I'm just making sure everyone else knows it." For once, I wasn't raising my voice. I didn't need to. Calm was more frightening than anger. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my family. What more do you want? She sounded smaller now, like someone finally realizing the safety net was gone. "I want you to understand what betrayal feels like. I want you to know what it's like when someone you trust lies to your face every single day. I want you to feel as small and worthless as you made me feel." The words came slowly, deliberately, each one chosen because she deserved to hear them. "Tom, I'm not finished talking." I leaned back in my chair, eyes still on Danny, on a world that hadn't betrayed me. "For 15 years, I gave you everything I had. My love, my trust, my loyalty, my support. I worked 60-hour weeks to help pay for this house, this life, this image you were so desperate to maintain, and you threw it all away for a broke loser in an expensive suit." Jessica was sobbing now, loud and unrestrained, but I felt no sympathy. She'd had plenty of chances to tell the truth, to end the affair, to choose her marriage over her boyfriend. She'd made her decision every single day for a month, and now she was living with the total of those choices. "You want to know what's going to happen next?" I continued, my voice steady. "You're going to disappear. You're going to take whatever's left of your dignity and your broke boyfriend, and you're going to leave Portsmouth. Because if you stay, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Every client you try to work with, every friend you try to make, every place you try to rebuild your life, I'll be there first, telling them the truth about Jessica Waverly." "You can't do that." "Watch me." I hung up and immediately called Cassie. "Time for the grand finale. Is everything ready?" "Oh, it's ready. You sure you want to go through with this? Once we do this, there's no taking it back." Even she sounded cautious now, aware of how final this would be. "I'm sure." That evening was the monthly Portsmouth Business Association mixer, held at the Harborview Hotel. A gathering of local business owners, professionals, and community leaders. Exactly the kind of event where Jessica would normally be networking, building relationships, maintaining her image. It was her natural habitat, a room built on handshakes, smiles, and quiet power plays. She wouldn't be there tonight, of course, but Marco would be. Cassie had made sure of that, spreading word through her network that there would be potential investors at the mixer, people looking to put money into promising local businesses. For a desperate man like Marco, it would be irresistible bait, the illusion of opportunity he couldn't afford to ignore. I arrived at the mixer at 7 o'clock, wearing my best suit and carrying a folder full of documents. The hotel ballroom was packed with Portsmouth's business elite, people I'd known for years but rarely socialized with. They were Jessica's crowd, not mine. But tonight, that was going to change. Marco was easy to spot, standing near the bar in his expensive suit, working the room like the professional con man he was. His smile was polished, his gestures confident, his posture designed to project success he didn't actually possess. He was talking to a group of older businessmen, probably spinning some story about his import-export empire and the investment opportunities it represented. I waited until he was fully engaged with his audience, then walked over and joined the conversation. "Gentlemen," I said, extending my hand to the group. "Tom Waverly, Waverly Auto Restoration. I couldn't help but overhear you talking about investment opportunities." Marco's face went pale when he saw me, the color draining instantly, but he couldn't escape without making a scene. "Mr. DeLuca here has been telling us about his import business," said one of the older men, a local bank president I recognized. "Sounds very promising." "Oh, it is," I said, opening my folder. "Marco's business is fascinating. Did he tell you about his innovative payment structure? How he's 3 months behind on rent but still manages to maintain that expensive car?" The group's attention shifted to me, their expressions growing curious. Marco tried to interrupt, but I kept talking, my voice calm and authoritative. "Or his unique approach to supplier relationships? Most businesses pay their suppliers within 30 days. Marco's managed to stretch that to 90 days, and some of them are demanding cash up front now." "Now wait just a minute," Marco started. "I'm not finished," I said, pulling out a sheet of paper. "This is a list of Marco's creditors. Fascinating reading. Did you know he owes $18,000 to a furniture supplier in Boston? Or that his business license expires next week and he doesn't have the money to renew it?" The bank president took the paper and scanned it, his expression growing more concerned with each line. "Mr. DeLuca, is this information accurate?" Marco's face was red now, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "This is a private matter." "Nothing private about public records," I said. "Everything I'm telling you is available through the Secretary of State's office, the Better Business Bureau, and various court filings. Marco's business isn't an investment opportunity, it's a sinking ship." "You have no right." Marco stepped toward me, his hands clenched. "I have every right, especially since you've been financing your failing business with my wife's money." That got everyone's attention. The entire group was staring now, and I could see other conversations stopping as people turned to listen. "That's right," I continued, my voice carrying across the room. "Marco here has been having an affair with my wife, Jessica Waverly. Convinced her to clean out her savings account to bail out his business. $15,000 gone in one day." The room had gone completely silent. Marco looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "But here's the really interesting part," I said, pulling out the photo from the velvet note. "Jessica's been telling everyone that her marriage was over, that she was separated, that she was free to date. Funny thing is, she never told me any of that. Far as I knew, we were still married when she started playing house with Marco here." I handed the photo to the bank president, who studied it with obvious disgust. "This was taken 3 weeks ago at the velvet note. My wife, still wearing her wedding ring with her boyfriend. She'd told me she was at a professional networking event." The bank president handed the photo back to me and turned to Marco. "Mr. DeLuca, I think this conversation is over." The group dispersed quickly, leaving Marco standing alone by the bar, but I wasn't finished with him yet. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice so everyone in the room could hear, "I'd like to share something with all of you. A cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the importance of doing your homework before getting involved with someone." The entire ballroom was listening now. Marco tried to leave, but I blocked his path. "This man, Marco DeLuca, has been having an affair with my wife for the past month. He convinced her that he was a successful businessman, a good investment, someone worth destroying her marriage for. In reality, he's broke, desperate, and willing to lie to anyone who might give him money." I pulled out another document. "This is a copy of my wife's bank records, showing a $15,000 withdrawal last Tuesday. Money that went straight to Marco to keep his failing business afloat for another month or two. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Several people were taking photos with their phones, probably already posting the story to social media. But the real kicker, I continued, is that Marco's been telling people around town that he stole Jessica from the grease monkey, that she was trading up to a real man. Funny how a real man needs a married woman's savings account to pay his bills. Marco finally found his voice. You're insane. This is harassment. This is truth, I said. Everything I've told you can be verified. Court records, bank records, witness statements. Your girlfriend destroyed her marriage, her career, and her family for a man who can't even pay his rent. Marco pushed past me and headed for the exit, but the damage was done. The entire room was buzzing with conversation, people pulling out their phones to share the story with friends and colleagues. I spent the next hour answering questions, showing documents to anyone who wanted to see them, making sure everyone understood exactly what had happened. By the time I left the hotel, the story was already spreading across social media. Marco DeLuca and Jessica Waverly were officially the most talked about scandal in Portsmouth. But I still had one more card to play. Saturday morning, I drove to the Marriott where Jessica had been staying since I threw her out. The desk clerk, a young man who'd heard the story from his girlfriend who worked at Coastal Properties, was more than happy to help. She checked out yesterday, he said, paid her bill in cash and left with a guy in a Porsche. Looked like they were in a hurry. Perfect. Jessica and Marco were running, probably hoping to escape the scandal and start over somewhere else. But I'd made sure they wouldn't get far. That afternoon, I received a call from Detective Ray Marsh, a Portsmouth police officer I'd known since high school. Tom, I heard about what happened with Jessica. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. Thanks, Ray, but I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. We got a complaint about harassment from a Marco DeLuca. Says you've been stalking him, threatening him, interfering with his business. I laughed. Is that what he's calling it? I prefer to think of it as public education. Tom, I know you're hurting, but you need to be careful. This guy could cause trouble for you if you're not smart about it. Don't worry about me, Ray. I've been very careful to stay within the law. Everything I've done has been perfectly legal. Can't help it if the truth is inconvenient for Marco and Jessica. Just watch yourself, okay? Guys like Marco sometimes have friends who don't care about the law. After Ray hung up, I sat in my office and considered his warning. Marco was desperate, humiliated, and running out of options. Men in that situation sometimes did stupid things. Good. I was counting on it. Sunday evening, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized Marco's voice immediately. You destroyed my life, he said, his voice shaking with rage. My business is ruined, my reputation is shot, and Jessica won't even talk to me anymore. Sounds like you're finally facing reality, I said. How does it feel? You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you've won some kind of victory? I think I've told the truth about two people who were living a lie. If that destroyed your life, maybe your life wasn't worth much to begin with. This isn't over, Marco said. You can't do this to people and just walk away. Actually, I can, and I did. You and Jessica made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. We'll see about that. The line went silent. Marco had just made his final mistake, threatening me over the phone. Now I had everything I needed for the grand finale. Monday morning, I called Ray Marsh and reported the threatening phone call. Then I called my lawyer and had him file a restraining order against Marco. By noon, Marco DeLuca was officially prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my business. But the best part was yet to come. That afternoon, I received a visit from two men in expensive suits who identified themselves as representatives of Marco's creditors. The kind of people Ray had warned me about, the kind who didn't care much about the law. Mr. Waverly, said the older of the two men, we understand you've been in contact with Marco DeLuca recently. I have. He called me yesterday to make threats. We're not interested in your personal dispute with Mr. DeLuca. We're interested in recovering the money he owes our client. I leaned back in my chair, studying the two men. They looked like accountants, but there was something harder underneath the professional exterior. How much money are we talking about? I asked. $50,000 plus interest. Mr. DeLuca borrowed this money to finance his business, with the understanding that it would be repaid within 90 days. That deadline passed 2 weeks ago. And you think I know where he is? We think you might be able to help us locate him. We understand he's been romantically involved with your wife. I pretended to consider their request. I might be able to help you, but I'd want something in return. What kind of something? I want Marco DeLuca to disappear, permanently. I want him to leave Portsmouth and never come back. I want him to stay away from my wife, my business, and my life. The older man smiled. I think we can arrange that. I gave them Marco's last known address, his phone number, and the license plate number of his Porsche. I also mentioned that he'd been staying at various hotels around the area, probably paying cash to avoid being tracked. One more thing, I said, as they prepared to leave. Marco's been telling people he's getting married to my wife as soon as our divorce is final. You might want to check with her. She's been financing his lifestyle recently. The two men exchanged glances. How recently? Last Tuesday, $15,000 in cash, withdrawn from her savings account. Interesting. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Waverly. They left without another word. By evening, Marco DeLuca had bigger problems than a restraining order and a ruined reputation. He had people looking for him who didn't care about legal niceties. Tuesday morning brought the final piece of the puzzle. Jessica called, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom, what did you do? Marco's gone. He left in the middle of the night, took what money I had left and disappeared. Sounds like Marco finally showed you his true colors. There were men looking for him, dangerous men. They came to the hotel, asking questions about money he owed them. $50,000 last I heard, plus interest. Jessica gasped. 50,000? He told me he just needed a small loan to get through a rough patch. Marco told you a lot of things. How many of them turned out to be true? Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, none of them. So now you know what it feels like to be lied to by someone you trusted. How does it feel, Jessica? I'm scared, Tom. I'm alone. I have no money, no job, nowhere to go. You made your choice. You chose Marco over me, lies over truth, fantasy over reality. This is what that choice looks like. Please, Tom, I know I don't deserve your help, but I have nowhere else to turn. I considered her request for exactly 3 seconds. You're right. You don't deserve my help, and you're not going to get it. Tom. Goodbye, Jessica. Don't call me again. I hung up and blocked her number. Then I sat back in my chair and smiled. Jessica Waverly had lost her job, her savings, her family, her friends, her reputation, and her boyfriend. She was alone in a hotel room with no money and no prospects, finally understanding what betrayal felt like. Marco DeLuca was running from creditors who wouldn't be satisfied with excuses or promises. His business was finished, his reputation was destroyed, and he'd burned every bridge in Portsmouth. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be, free, vindicated, and ready to start over. The grease monkey had won. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in New England, and I felt more alive than I had in months. The shop was busy, my phone had stopped ringing with Jessica's desperate calls, and Portsmouth was buzzing with gossip about the spectacular collapse of the town's most notorious cheating couple. But I wasn't quite finished yet. Around 10 o'clock, Cassie called with the final update I'd been waiting for. Your boy Marco tried to skip town yesterday, she said, barely containing her laughter. Made it as far as the Massachusetts border before his creditors caught up with him. What happened? Let's just say he's going to be working very hard for the next few years to pay off his debts. Word is, they offered him a choice. Work for them until the money's paid back, or face the consequences of defaulting on a $50,000 loan from people who don't accept bankruptcy as an excuse. And Jessica? Checked out of the Marriott this morning. Paid her final bill with a credit card that got declined twice before finally going through. My friend at the front desk says she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Perfect. Jessica was finally experiencing the consequences of her choices, and Marco was learning that real businessmen don't run import-export companies out of warehouses full of cheap furniture. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Bishop stood in the doorway of my shop, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her, but with a dignity that commanded respect. "Thomas," she said formally, "may I speak with you?" I wiped my hands on a shop rag and gestured to my office. "Of course, Mrs. Bishop. Please, come in." Eleanor settled into the chair across from my desk, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. "I came to apologize." That caught me off guard. "Apologize for what?" "For 15 years of treating you like you weren't good enough for my daughter, for judging you by your profession instead of your character, for believing that success was measured by the size of your bank account rather than the content of your heart." I leaned back in my chair, studying Jessica's mother, the woman who had looked down on me at every family gathering, who had made subtle comments about Jessica settling when she married a mechanic. "Mrs. Bishop, please let me finish." Eleanor's voice was steady, but I could see the effort it took. Harold and I raised Jessica to value appearances over substance, status over integrity. We taught her that what people thought of her mattered more than what she actually was. In doing so, we created the woman who could betray a good man for the illusion of something better. She opened her purse and pulled out a small jewelry box. "This was my grandmother's wedding ring. I always planned to give it to Jessica when she renewed her vows with you on your 20th anniversary. I'd like you to have it instead." I stared at the box, unsure what to say. "Mrs. Bishop, I can't." "You can, and you will, because you're the son-in-law I should have appreciated while I had the chance. Because you loved my daughter faithfully for 15 years, even when she didn't deserve it. Because you showed more grace and dignity in the face of betrayal than most men would have managed." Eleanor stood up, smoothing down her coat. "Jessica called us yesterday. She wanted to come home, wanted us to help her rebuild her life after Marco abandoned her. And Harold told her that she made her choice when she chose to betray her marriage vows, that she was no longer welcome in our home until she learned the difference between love and selfishness." Eleanor Bishop walked to the door, then turned back to face me one final time. "You deserved better than my daughter, Thomas. I hope someday you find it." After she left, I sat in my office holding the small jewelry box, thinking about 15 years of marriage to a woman whose own mother had just disowned her. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally earned Eleanor Bishop's respect by destroying her daughter's life. That evening, I drove to Murphy's Bar to celebrate with Cassie. The place was packed with the usual crowd of locals, but tonight there was an electric energy in the air. Everyone wanted to talk about the Jessica and Marco scandal, and I found myself holding court at the bar, accepting congratulations and free drinks from people who'd never paid much attention to me before. "You're like a local celebrity," Cassie said, sliding another beer across the bar. "Half the women in town are saying they wish their husbands had your backbone. And the other half? Think you went too far, but they're probably the ones who've been cheating on their own husbands, so their opinion doesn't count." Around 9 o'clock, the bar's atmosphere shifted. Conversations died down, and I could feel eyes turning toward the entrance. I looked over my shoulder and saw Jessica standing in the doorway, looking like a ghost of her former self. She'd lost weight, her expensive clothes hung loose on her frame, and her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. But it was her eyes that really showed the damage, hollow, defeated, empty of the ambition and confidence that had once defined her. Jessica scanned the room until she spotted me at the bar. Then she walked over, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her across the room. "Tom," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" The entire bar had gone silent, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. Cassie moved closer, ready to intervene if things got ugly. "I think you've said everything that needs saying," I replied, not turning around to face her. "Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the bar. "You've got 2 minutes. Right here, right now. Whatever you want to say it in front of everyone." Jessica glanced around the room, realizing that her private conversation was going to be very public. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the bar. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you," she began, her voice barely audible. "I know I destroyed our marriage, destroyed my life, destroyed everything good I ever had. You're right, you don't have the right. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I threw away, what I lost, what I'll never get back." I finally turned to face her. Do you? Do you really understand, Jessica? Because I don't think you do." "Tom, you think this is about the affair, about Marco, about the lying and the cheating and the betrayal. But it's not." I stood up, my voice carrying across the silent room. "This is about who you really are. About the fact that when you had to choose between doing the right thing and doing the selfish thing, you chose selfishness every single time." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. "You didn't just cheat on me, Jessica. You cheated on yourself. You threw away 15 years of marriage for a man you barely knew, a man who was using you for money, a man who abandoned you the moment things got difficult. I know. You gave him $15,000 of our money we saved together, money we were going to use for our future. You handed it over to a stranger because he told you what you wanted to hear." The tears were flowing freely now, but Jessica didn't try to wipe them away. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I was wrong about everything." "Yes, you were. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? Want me to forgive you and take you back and pretend none of this happened? I want you to know that I'm sorry, that I understand what I did to you, to us, to myself." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 15 years, this stranger who'd destroyed everything we'd built together. "Your apology is noted," I said finally. "Now get out." Jessica stood there for another moment, as if waiting for some sign of forgiveness or hope. When none came, she turned and walked out of the bar, leaving behind a room full of witnesses to her final humiliation. The silence lasted for about 10 seconds before the entire bar erupted in conversation. People were laughing, cheering, buying me drinks, slapping me on the back like I'd just won the World Series. But I felt empty. Not sad, not angry, just empty. Like a chapter of my life had finally closed, leaving nothing but blank pages ahead. Cassie leaned across the bar and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I'm perfect." Thursday morning brought one final surprise, a knock on my door at home, early enough that I was still drinking my first cup of coffee. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm, when everything familiar feels slightly altered. I opened it to find a young woman I didn't recognize, holding a manila envelope. She looked professional but cautious, like someone stepping into a situation she already knew was volatile. "Mr. Waverly, I'm Sarah Chen from the Portsmouth Herald. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on the story we're running about your wife's affair." She said it plainly, without sensationalism, but the weight of the words still landed hard. I took the envelope and scanned the article inside. Front page, complete with photos of Jessica and Marco, a detailed timeline of their relationship, and quotes from various people around town who'd been affected by their deception. The layout was clean, methodical, almost clinical. It didn't read like gossip. It read like an indictment. "Looks thorough," I said, handing the article back to her. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. We tried to reach Mrs. Waverly for comment, but she seems to have left town. Any idea where she might have gone? Her pen hovered over her notepad, ready. I shrugged. She's not my problem anymore. And for the first time since all this began, that statement felt true. What about you? How does it feel to have your personal life become such a public story? It feels like justice, I said. The word surprised me with how accurate it felt. Jessica and Marco thought they could lie to everyone, use people, destroy relationships without consequences. They were wrong. Sarah scribbled notes on her pad. Some people are saying you went too far, that destroying someone's career and reputation over a personal matter was excessive. Some people have never been betrayed by someone they trusted. Some people have never had their marriage destroyed by lies and selfishness. Some people don't understand that actions have consequences. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. And what's next for you? I looked out at my quiet street, at the house I'd shared with Jessica for 15 years, at the life I was about to rebuild from scratch. The garage still smelled faintly of oil. My truck sat where it always had. Not everything had been taken from me. Next, I get back to work. I run my business, I fix cars, I live my life. Without liars, without cheaters, without people who think they can use others and walk away clean. Any regrets? I thought about that question for a moment. About 15 years of marriage. About the woman I'd loved and lost. About the choices that had led us to this moment. About the signs I'd ignored because believing had been easier than questioning. Just one, I said finally. I regret not seeing who Jessica really was sooner. Sarah finished her notes and left me alone with my coffee and my thoughts. In a few hours, the entire story would be public, printed in black and white for everyone to read. Jessica's betrayal, Marco's deception, my methodical revenge, all of it laid out like evidence in a court case, impossible to spin or explain away. But I was done being the victim in this story, done being the fool who'd been lied to and used and discarded, done being the grease monkey who wasn't good enough for his ambitious wife. I'd become something else entirely, something harder, smarter, more dangerous than anyone had expected. I'd become the man who wrote the ending to his own story. And as I sat on my porch that morning, watching the sun rise over Portsmouth, I realized that this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. The beginning of a life without lies, without betrayal, without people who thought they could use Thomas Waverly and walk away unscathed. They'd all called me a villain in the end. Jessica, Marco, even some of the people around town who thought I'd gone too far. They never realized I'd written the script from the very beginning, and in my script the grease monkey always wins.